So I made this comic back in 2014, 2015-ish, I want to say. So I am going to be critiquing my own comic artwork and see all the flaws and see all the areas that I improve and see what is that I like about it. Hey, welcome back. This is Cetriya, Cetriya, and we are all fellow artists and stuff like that. A lot of us are doing comics. I know a lot of you came over from the 100 Days of Making Comics, but one of the biggest thing is the fact that we look at our old artwork and be like, oh, no, this is not kosher. Well, I'm going to do that for you guys today. And actually, I hope this is somewhat motivational to you guys, in that you gotta respect the fact that you gotta grow starting from somewhere and eventually improve. And the fact that you can see the flaws in your old artwork means that you improve. If anything, if you don't see any flaws in your old artwork, maybe that is actually a warning sign to say that you haven't actually improved yet. So I just thought I would be flipping through this and just kind of like a commentary on my own artwork. So before we get straight into the book, there's no surprise, I love my manga style influences. I'm quite biased and prefer black and white comics over color. It's only recently that I've started to see more and more color comics to my liking because they respect the color palette and telling a story through color. But a lot of times, a lot of color comics are just like throwing color everywhere or dodge and burn everything and super high contrast, high saturation. And to me, who is very sensitive to how I see artwork, if I have to sit and look at something for long periods of time, especially if I'm trying to get into a story, it tends to be a bit distracting to me. So this is just personal for me. So this is one of the only illustrations where I tried to go as traditional manga-ish style. And lately, if you guys are into the whole in another world / isekai stories, you'll notice that a lot of mangakas for those stories have moved towards a more digital look. So this was created in Manga Studio / Clip Studio, as it known now. And personally, for me, I still think that Clip Studio / Manga Studio's inking engine looks closest to traditional work than either Photoshop or even like Fire Applica, which is a free one, I think, and a couple of other tools out there. Simply, I don't know, it's just there's something about the feel where it looks more like actual manga artwork. So this was the giant poster that I did. So for like the cover, and to an extent the background cover, I did the main drawing by hand, but the colors was watercolor, digital watercolor, like fake digital Photoshop coloring. And I will say that as you learn about printing, and when you start getting samples about printing, you realize that there has been a number of things that you wish you could do better. And for me, it's just the printing quality of the colors, not the printer themselves, but and it gets into the whole spiel about printing and stuff like that. But it got really dark in some areas and really bright in some areas, and that's will probably be like the overall critique for this book, is that there was too light and too many, there's too white of a white areas and too black of the black areas. But let's get into that. Alright, so this book was about, I want to say, 65-ish pages of comic work, and it took longer than it should have been because I kept moving around and stuff like that. And I find it's really difficult to get through a comic, but this is probably my longest series that I've ever done in general. So let's just get into it. So like I said, I decided to go with a gray wash digital watercolor theme, and a lot of things that I've already noticed was where it's really black and dark is really dark. And I was also getting used to the watercolor tools in Photoshop. A lot of the inking, I think halfway through, was done with Photoshop also. And some of the stuff was done on the bus back, or in like the train or the mass transit back when I was in New York and working from there, so I know this is a pretty old store. It's old art. You can barely probably see some of the characters, and that's the thing about when you're creating illustration. You should be able to tell what the shapes are from afar, but right now all you see is like blob. It's not until you go really close can you see, oh, this is the artwork. And I remember there was a critique by one of the editors at Yen Press that said I did too much with my tones. Not for this particular book, but I tend to overdo my tones sometimes. But it's really hard to find a balance because every artist comes with a different point of view or a different style. But still, at the end of the day, when you're working with like black and white stuff, you want a higher contrast just so people can see you. And then me blobbing the crowd scenes. I hate doing crowd scenes. I still do hate doing crowd scenes. Other things to think about is like look at this. This is like way too much clutter and pattern all over and details that no one cares about. The perspective is probably not. The perspective, you get the point of it, but it's not really accurate. You can barely see the tree in here, but it's just a bunch of extra stuff. You know what I mean? Just like extra stuff. The lettering is legible. It's just not what you expect a comic book's lettering supposed to look like. It just doesn't look as good. And you got a background scene that, again, the ink work is too sketchy. You barely see what is going on. But the positives is that in general, the panel layout is understandable. You know, it's the American style, this way, that way, that way. And you can see the panels. There's, you know, proper spacing and stuff like that. I don't have anything too much in the gutter, and the gutter is like when it's like so far in here, the most important things like the legibility and stuff like that isn't too far in the gutter. I do attempt to do some kind of background. It was probably mostly like a photo overlay trace, like I just drew on top of the photo. You get the sense that it's in water. This was probably a really lovely composition. I just thought of it. I don't think I referenced that, but you get the idea that they're going through like a water valley or something like that. I did change up the fonts between when people's yelling and when they're talking, which is very helpful. This scene is just bad. It's not, but let's see. This lighting is correct. Well, correct-ish. It's pretty good, I would say. You get that the outside is brighter than the inside from the back, so I appreciate that. I do appreciate that I did some like foreground elements and then background elements to kind of like break up the space. I do different kind of angles. I noticed that in a lot of beginner, like I said, I feel like I'm relatively intermediate-ish kind of. I do feel that a lot of beginners tend to do talking head syndromes where there's just people talking to each other and they don't tilt the angles or they look, you know, change the angles, such as this is like a top-down view and you get it. It's a border or a harbor. This is a boat and this is like materials. I put relatively quite a number of like details on these crates and stuff like that, and guys working, you know, moving around, and then you have right here them different people carrying stuff, characters coming in. So you get a sense of the actual area that they're in. And it's really important that more beginners need to actually show some sort of background, because as a reader, even though I didn't draw them that great, like it wasn't that good, you still get a sense that, okay, they're in a valley area and they're in a little village area by the water, and, you know, people, you know, do that and stuff like that. Here's another kind of paneling that I liked, where you saw who he was coming, you know, who he was talking, you know where he's going, you saw who he's talking to, and then you have the two characters kind of silhouette him. And a lot of the times I get these kind of ideas by watching TV or film. So if you find a really good like film that you like, sit down and just sit down and like take screenshots and stuff. You have the character breaking into panel to add a little bit more dynamicness into it. And I do reference different style things, like you got this little jitter little lines here to show that he's shaking, and then you have a panel transition that if I didn't point it to you, you probably would have not really noticed that, because from here it's just one giant panel. And I think I was pretty successful in how this read. You get a sense for it, so I like this paneling. It was pretty good. I think the setup made sense. You know, they go to school, he went to a friend's house and stuff like that. let's see, how did she, let's see. Here's something that I noticed. So she's running after him, and then we change scene here. He's running, but I never showed that she actually was on her thing, but all of a sudden she shows up. I don't think that's a proper transition. I probably would transition better, and I've gotten critiques of people telling me that they got the idea of the story, so it's legible, but it could have been better. And even in my most recent comic Cross Star, if you haven't, check out Cross Star, please. It's online. So by all means take a read. That I should be working more on that, and I think there is some kind of subconscious thing that's going on where I'm trying to compensate for my lack of being able to do something. Let's see here. I was not afraid to use some variation of special effects, and I really need to work on that. I do need to work about how I like flip between, or like do the break the 180 or stuff like that. All of a sudden you see her mother, but you would not, I mean, you get, but if I didn't mention it, still it could be just a random lady. You know what I mean? Like you don't see her ever again. I do appreciate the speed lines that's going on here, which is why some people have comments that I should probably do more action stuff, but it is an area that I'm not really strong in, but you get it. He pushed past her, so I do see that, and then transition of her seeing him fly off. That makes sense. Then we get into like seeing the tornadoes and the water. I have not drawn water prior to this. This is part of the reason, well, I've drawn it, but not really. That's part of the reason why I wanted this to be a water type area, and that is to challenge myself. So I always say, if you're going to do a new project, especially if it's not a long project, challenge yourself. Learning how to do thunder and lightning and word effects, tornadoes, just trying out different techniques and stuff like that. It's really, really effective. I do personally say, if you're going to do that for a webcomic. So here's another tip or commentary, is that something like this should have been on a page turner. And what I mean is, like, this should have been on that side, and then when you turn the page like this, all of a sudden you would see this page. And the reason is because when you turn a page, subconsciously you get the feeling of, I am transitioning, and this is such a big transition from one location to another that it was not as effective. And I noticed I've done that in a couple of areas, so I'm trying to be more cognizant of the page turner if you're dealing with printed books, you know what I mean? So here's a positive. I really do appreciate some of the angles. He moved through. He's on the water surface. He moved through the tornadoes and stuff like that. She's trying to follow him. Although I didn't show her getting another things, but it's okay. Like I said, page transition. You don't exactly see them in there either. It's like I really need to print these things out beforehand. But yeah, so you see that change transition, and then you get the sense that she is behind him. Special effects again. It looks pretty moody. See him, and I think I stopped doing some of their faces because the angle of which I was drawing the characters, I'm not really strong at making characters at that angle. I definitely want to work on getting that better. And then of course he sees, and really you should be looking forward when you're driving. Don't do what these characters do. And you get that transition. Him, her, him, and then he turns back, so you get where he's looking at, and then you see her. And this is again one of those things where I think I should have worked on the balance between contrast and low contrast. I think she needs more white around her so you could really see her, and then have the drop shadow be more higher contrast on her, so you get like a really strong silhouette of the drop shadow, and then her white out, and then you see the danger behind, and probably do something better with the special effects. But all in all, this is relatively good. You get the sense of where it's going. The paneling makes sense, and of course you have the way the word balloons go from the S curve, and I try to do that, try to keep to that. This was definitely a tough panel for me to look. I had to really research older style manga on how they render rain and wash and splash water, because I feel like the new ones are so like high level detail or like very digital that it's hard for you to look at something and then learn from it. So I looked up a lot of old school manga, which is why sometimes people look at my stuff and it's like, oh, your stuff is kind of like retro, old school. And that's only because since I'm not actually, around people that draw in this style on a regular basis, I don't have anybody there to really mentor or tutor you. And I feel like a lot of the new stuff don't really tackle like all these special effects without it being computer generated or for whatever reason. So this is a pretty tough panel for me to draw that water, because again, I don't draw water that much. How to draw someone getting tied up in a cyclone. I think I might have seen that once somewhere. Or to try to render that he's saying something but you can't see. And then this like transition. So here's an example where I did the water transition correctly. You end the scene and then you turn over to the next page. That is a proper transition. You get the sense that, oh, we're changing. So prior scene, next scene, and then I went even higher key with the blacks, because usually blacks denote not just night, but it denotes not just darkness, but it denotes a very change of perhaps mood. This is a darkened mood or not so nice. So even though you're not using color, if you start out from the beginning, it's a pretty light pages, pretty high key, some delicate, lines and everything, and then you go really dark and black. So I'm glad about this. I know in some older manga they do that a lot, where even though the characters is in full darkness, you still need to show them that they're in someplace. So this is kind of like the shape and the transition. So I really appreciate that. And blank pages. The blank pages came about mostly because of me trying to compensate with the page turning issue and effect, or and stuff like that. So that's where I come up with blank pages. I was also thinking, which we didn't make that high enough goal, that I would probably sketch into the books. Or if I'm at a convention and people say they want to sketch something, I'll sketch in the book, but then ultimately I end up sketching like towards the front here. So you got a couple of these going about. See, blank page, blank page. This comes towards really planning out your book. And this is, like I said, the longest book that I've done, and there's a lot of things that I learned from them. And it's okay to make these kind of mistakes and actually learning from them. Again, I didn't do that much background stuff prior to this, so comics is definitely the area to push you to do things that you not normally would. This just looks like a hot mess. Like I'm not even gonna try to even talk around this. This is just straight up a hot mess. You get it. It's a valley. It's cloudy. It's, dark waters. But after that, it just looks like a blob. And I'm definitely hoping to practice in the future on how to render these kind of things to look good. It's fine for a webcomic. It's not fine for something that you're going to keep in perpetuity of a book that people collect. I've gotten wonderful feedback, and I thank you guys. I really do. I'm not saying that what I gave you was heart garbage. I'm just saying that I am improving, and I'm just sharing it with fellow artists that you will approve, but you got to start somewhere. Let's see here. So transition, still you have to have backgrounds, even if you're not good at drawing. Backgrounds, you know where you are. And then you got transition to the people. And something to denote is that sometimes you want to really have different panel shapes, and you got the big panel to show you keyframe. Like if this was a movie, they'd be like panning in slowly and going into the video, and then cutscene into what you're going now, and then cutscene who are the main characters. These are the two characters in this current scene. I've never drawn horses before prior to this. There was a lot of referencing on not only how to draw horses, but to actually get photos of horses. So again, just because you don't know how to do something does not mean that you yourself should just avoid it. You got to do it. This is probably a good example of I'm not really liking the word balloons. I know there's some people that say, well, you're American and you read like long ways to do long balloons, but so many of the comics that I've read, I'm just so used to aesthetically coming up with word balloons more in the vertical sense. I don't know why. It's just that's my mental image vocabulary or library. So I try to do the compensation that some of the Korean ones do, which they make very large balloons. which is still aesthetically pleasing. My only thing is, and this is really nitpicking, is that the width of the balloons are not the same. And you're like thinking, who cares about the width of balloons? But when you look at it as an overall package, it really makes a difference on whether this stuff looks well crafted and well detailed and, very intentional. So, yes, so I started, did the characters. Again, you did different angles. You got like the tilted Dutch angle. So don't be afraid to try different new things. I did kind of got lazy with drawing all these pillows and these carriages, but you get the idea. She's in like a giant carriage. I feel like it's a throne, and she has like jewelry and stuff like that. I do like the scene here. You got the two soldiers basically showing barrier to entry or barrier for movement. You're not allowed to move. That's just like a classic scene. So, what else about this? Oh, another classic scene that you get in general from movies is the little dog or the little person looking down, and then he's looking up to the authority figure, and she's looking down at him. So that's one of those classic scenes that really denotes who has power and who does not have power, who has authority and stuff like that. So, I don't know if you can really tell, but this was very gray, you can see, and then this was light gray blue thing, and that's something to deal with your color profile, and that's a whole nother thing. But setting up the file to send it out to the printers, and they kind of emailed me back and forth for things that needed to be worked on and fixed and stuff like that. So yeah, I sent this as a color file. They charged me these 2 pages as color because I didn't send it properly as black and white. But now you know. Getting back into this because my camera died. In general, I feel I like the general balance of it. It's a nice page spread, so definitely want to consider when you open out your page, especially like this, it comes out nice and balanced. So I'm liking it so far. So all in all, if I were to give myself a grade, I would say I probably call this a B minus, and that's just about passing. That's relatively like 70% out of 75%. Yeah, 75% out of 100 in terms of grading this. In general, I do appreciate the work that I put into it. I learned about my own personal habits. This was the longest comic project that I've ever worked on, and like I said, there's a lot of mistakes in here, but there's also a lot of stuff to appreciate. And quite frankly, you cannot improve if you don't challenge yourself in the work that you do. Things like the graphic designing of the book, the layout of the book, understanding text, font, typography, color, texture, rendering, Photoshop, program, like there's so much that I learned from the book, and there's so much that is learned when you work on a personal short project that that you just cannot do if you're just sitting there drawing, a bunch of talking heads or just not doing comics at all. I think comics is probably like the area to really push yourself and challenge yourself to do things that, if you really want to make a good story, you're going to make yourself draw. Like you're going to do the drawing of the backgrounds. I don't know how to draw mechs, but I got a story that has mechs. So by golly, I'm going to draw some discombobulated, mutilated looking mechs, but I'm going to draw it to get better. And the best thing is getting feedback from others also. So let me know in the comments if you have a project yourself that you have worked on. How do you feel about your, this art that you've created in the past? How do you feel about it? And what do you feel about you as an artist, as a creative for the future? What new projects you're going to be working on? What new challenges you want to focus on to help you improve, or just something to challenge yourself, something that you want to do, something to keep things fun and not, boring and monotonous. So I look forward to you guys' comments. Thank you for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please, click on the like button, because that's the only way to get YouTube to share my videos to others. And I will see you guys in the next video.